Going to take a look at probably what is one of the coolest and most unique African cichlids in the hobby. I've actually got two of them in my tank, one which I bought quite recently from Urmston, which is an absolutely gorgeous fish. But today what we're going to do is we're going to take a deep dive into the Rostratus. Right, so the reason I wanted to talk about the Rostratus today is obviously because I've just recently bought one. Again, I went back to Urmston Aquatics and he had quite a few of these in, which were really nice. Slowly becoming my go-to place at Urmston for African cichlids. They have really quality fish. All the peacocks there are stunning, full of colour. Spud, who runs the place, really helpful guy, so he'll tell you exactly what he's getting in, when it's going to land, so you know what to expect when you go in, and you're not sort of wasting a journey and things when you go there. The fish that I've had off him in the past, all the peacock cichlids, amazing colour. All those peacocks have held their colour really well. So I've had juiced fish in the past. I've got a lot of experience with them because I've kept African cichlids for such a long time. So I know all the warning signs. I know when, I know after a few days, a week or two of having those fish, if they've been juiced or not. And I can tell you with certainty that those fish are legit fish in that shop because all of them are holding the colour really well, and I'm really happy with them. But the Rostratus, anyway, I'll give you a closer look at the one that I bought the other day, a bit later on in the video. But really unique and beautiful African cichlid. They are predatory haps, so they do have predatory tendencies if you put in smaller fish in the tank. But if you're keeping stuff that are more or less the same size as the Rostratus itself, you shouldn't really have any issues. I've got two in this tank. They don't fight with one another. They don't pick on other fish. They're really placid and calm fish. But as long as you're keeping them with other fish that are relatively the same size as them. The dietary needs, they typically feed on invertebrates and smaller fish. So you need to give them a really rich protein diet when you've got them in your tank, which shouldn't be an issue. If you're keeping them with just peacocks and haps, then obviously you're feeding a protein-based food with those fish anyway. So you shouldn't really have any issues. Ideally, as far as tank mates go, you do want to keep them in a hap-only system. I'll be honest with you, I'm playing with fire a little bit with this tank setup because I've got a lot of predatory haps in here. Now, my advice to you would be to only keep a tank with predatory haps in and not mix them with peacocks and more common haps. But I'm kind of getting away with it at the moment, but I'm yet to see what happens when these fish really start packing on some size. So further down the line, obviously when I move house and I've got more space for tanks, I do plan on separating all the predatory haps from the peacock cichlids and having two separate tanks, especially with these Rostratus because they get massive. So they get really big. They can get to about 35 centimeters. I've seen some of these Rostratuses in fish stores. There used to be one in Stoke that had a couple of these full-grown adult Rostratus cichlids. And they were absolutely enormous. Not only did they get long, but they get girthy as well. So they turn into absolute beasts. So I may further down the line even need to get an even bigger tank than this one, because this is currently a 6-foot tank. Ideally for predatory haps, I want something that's going to be a little bit longer to give them more swimming space, or maybe something that's got a little bit more depth to it as well. So tank size is definitely something to consider when you get these fish. You don't want to be putting them in anything smaller than a 6-foot long tank. The main thing I like about these cichlids is the way that they look. So in the same way in which I like the Malawi eye biter, they're really different looking to other African cichlids. So African cichlids, they have a lot of similarities between different types because they're all evolving from the same sort of fish in the same lake. So they have a lot of similarities, whereas the sort of things like the Malawi eye biter and the Rostratus, they really look like they've evolved, or they've branched off and evolved their own way. So you can see they've got this long elongated face, which is, I think, is very similar looking to a Malawi gar. So if you've ever seen a Malawi gar, they've got very similar face shapes, but it's the coloration on them. They've got this sort of metallic, grungy look to them, and then they've got these little dark spots on the bottom. The females will be less colourful, so they tend to just be a silver fish with black blotches. But as you're probably already aware, with all female African cichlids, they're not really pretty fish to look at. The males are the ones that display the colour for breeding. But they've got this amazing metallic sort of hue that runs all the way along the body. And then they really sort of morph in colour as well. So sometimes they can go a really dark black-like colour on the body, and then these metallic hues flare up and fire up, and they just look amazing. When they're really in full bloom, you can really appreciate the fish. And another thing as well, I don't know if a lot of you have ever really sort of looked at African cichlids from this view, but I've got a open top tank where I've just got the net on the top. So if you get a view of these Rostratuses from the top down, a lot of African cichlids look amazing from this sort of point of view, to be fair, but if you look at the Rostratuses from the top down and you see these metallic colorations along the back, they look absolutely amazing. I know a lot of us aren't hanging over the top of our tank and sort of eyeballing our fish from above, but when you do get the opportunity to see them like that, they just look amazing from the top down. The colours really flare upwards where the light's bouncing back up from them. So all in all, absolutely stunning fish. Right, so let's get on to tank setups and requirements. So water parameters. You should already know all your water parameters. They're on the screen now, so exactly the same across the board for all African cichlids. Tank size. We've already touched on, you know, the size of the tank that you want to be having if you're keeping these fish. So, like we said before, you want a minimum of a 6-foot tank, 125 gallon to 180 gallon if you're keeping them as a group. But you need big tanks for these fish, because all that'll happen is if you keep these in something small, you'll end up with a fat lump taking up the majority of your tank that's just battering all your other fish. So they get big and they grow quick. So make sure if you're thinking about getting one of these, you have got a larger setup to accommodate for their growth. Substrate, as far as substrate goes, you want to be getting a fine sand. I believe that's the case for the majority of peacocks and haps, because Rostratuses, the sand sifters, they sift through the sand looking for invertebrates and things like that to eat. So if you've got large grain sizes, crushed coral probably isn't ideal for these fish. A fine aragonite sand or riverbed sand is better, because they will, if your grain sizes are too big on your sand bed, what will happen is this fish will be trying to sift through it and it'll start getting a lot of damage and wear and tear on its mouth. So just make sure you get a fine sand bed when you're keeping these fish as well. As far as tank decor goes, you really want to be minimalistic with the Rostratus because of the size it can get to, and with it being an open water swimmer, you want to keep your scape quite low and quite minimal. So as these fish grow, I'm going to need to take more and more rocks out of this tank because there's probably too many in here at the moment as it is. But I literally just have them in there for sort of the aesthetic purpose and it not just looking like a naked tank. But as they get bigger, you want to reduce the amount of hardscape that you've got in your tank to give them more swimming room. And also as well, with them being sort of big fish and you're having these chases and stuff around the tank, there is always a chance that if you've got a lot of hardscape obstructing the swimming space, they can get a spook or a fright and they can bang and smash into the rocks and do a bit of damage to themselves. So just try and be as minimalistic as possible. You can put stuff in there and get yourself a little bit of an aesthetic and stuff, but just be as minimalist as you can to give them the best environment inside the tank. And then as far as dietary needs goes, you want to be feeding them high quality, protein dense cichlid pellets. Ideally for predatory hats, my preferred food choice for them is frozen food. So frozen krill, frozen brine shrimp, the very odd bloodworm, because I know bloodworm don't do great with Malawis. I've heard they can cause Malawi bloat and stuff as well. So I try not to use bloodworm, but frozen brine shrimp, frozen krill, chopped prawns as well, really good for these fish. And then what I would avoid as well is, you don't typically see it often, but don't feed them any feeder fish. So tiny fish, to give them a bit of live food. It can potentially introduce parasites to the fish and stuff as well. So I'm really against live feeding. Not from sort of the cruelty perspective of it, but more so from the case that you can introduce a parasite to your fish and potentially do some damage to it long term. So try and stick with the frozen food. Frozen invertebrates are probably the best option for these fish. Right, so there you go. You've had a bit of a species profile on the Rostratuses. One of my all-time favourite African cichlids, and you can probably see why. As long as you follow sort of the rules, the majority of the rules in the video, you should have great success with this fish, and you should really be able to enjoy them. If you've got any sort of particular African cichlids that you keep, that you think really stand out amongst the others, drop them in the comments. Let me know what your favourite haplochromuses are and why. And if you enjoyed the video, subscribe. But what I'll do is I'll leave you with some close-up shots of the Rostratus, and then we'll see you in the next video.